Good afternoon. My name is Hugh McKenna and I'm Professor at the University of Ulster. And it's a great pleasure to be involved in the University of Sydney Distinguished Lecture Series. I know John Daly very well and I'm honoured and indeed humbled to be asked by him to give this lecture. The lecture is entitled The Pursuit of Excellence in Research Within Nursing, Challenges and Opportunity for the Next Decade. And hopefully the people who are listening to this are nurses either in early or mid-career who are going to be involved in addressing these challenges and being able to exploit the opportunities that they're going to come across in the next decade for research in nursing. I'm not going to go into a great deal of information of who I am. That link at the bottom of this first page shows you that it's on my details, and feel free to access that link, and it should tell you everything you need to know about me. Okay, predicting what's going to happen in the future is an inexact science, and Yogi Berra, who was a very famous American baseball player, said it's tough to make decisions, especially about the future. And we know that some people have tried and failed. For example, the International Monetary Fund's economists back in 1988, they examined 469 recessions across 194 countries, and they only predicted 4 in advance. And this is a science like economics. You would think they would get it better than that. They did predict 47 recessions, but none of them actually happened. So take the example currently of where we are with the coronavirus. Who could have predicted this time last year how we would behave and how it would affect us, and how humankind would be shut down for months because of this virus? We also know that in the US, the epicenter of innovation used to be in the East Coast, where the Fords, Rockefellers, Carnegies, and the Mellons built huge fortunes on everything from transport to oil. And now it's in the West, where Jobs, Steve Jobs, Gates, the Zuckerberg, the graphics of this world have made their fortunes in global technology, entertainment, and commerce. In the 1920s, a Model T Ford had 700 parts, most of which, from springs to axles to cylinders to parts of the engine generally, were produced on site. Today, many car audios have more than 700 parts, and they're produced all over the world. Today, the average smartphone that you probably have with you at the moment has a greater computer capacity than the Apollo space mission computer. And we know that 90% of all new jobs today, and I believe in the immediate future, are going to come from new startup, small growth companies. And 60% of those entering high school today across the world will work in enterprises and businesses and industries that don't currently exist. So I suppose I'm starting my lecture by looking at the future to say that it's a bit of an inexact science, trying to figure out where we're going to be in the future, and we don't even know 6 months away that we're going to be in lockdown. But I'll do my best. And I'm going to start off looking through these particular topics. I'm going to skip through them relatively quickly because I only have about 40 minutes. And hopefully I'll give you enough information on each so that you can perhaps look at other links to find out a little bit more. The UN Sustainability Goals 2030 are very important for nurses, because if you take a look at those, we're talking about here about 18 different sustainability development goals. Nursing has a major role to play in each one, from getting rid of poverty to quality education, to gender equality, to work conditions, to climate growth, and so on. But in order to do this, nursing and nurse researchers are not going to be able to do it alone. We really have to consider being part of, maybe even leading, multidisciplinary research or interdisciplinary research. Because if you take those goals that I've just shown you, the answer to these don't come in unique, very well-wrapped unidisciplinary packages. They come with a huge complexity that needs input from different researchers coming from different disciplines, bringing their own area of competence to the research. I have a definition here, which I'm not going to read out to you on interdisciplinary research, but I think you have to accept it. Just because you have a nurse and a doctor and a computer scientist and maybe an engineer working in the same team doesn't make it interdisciplinary any more than putting butter, flowers, eggs and milk into a bowl and expecting a cake to suddenly appear. It's the interaction between the components that brings around transformation. So it's more than just putting people together in the same lab. It's about the interaction and the transformation that that interaction brings. And there are barriers. Different disciplines within healthcare come with different theories, different education backgrounds, different scientific models, different research methods. And you can see here, Carlton famously said that we're like inhabitants of a number of little islands, all in the same part of the ocean, and each has evolved over a period of time from a different culture, different ways of doing things, different language to talk about what they do. And occasionally the inhabitants of one island may spot their neighbours jumping up and down with excitement about some new development, but it makes no sense to them, so they ignore it. There's a lot of truth in that. In many universities, nurses are in buildings that are separate from other disciplines. In some cases, even outside the main campus of the university, because they've been the latest import, if you like, into the academia. So Winston Churchill famously said that we shape our buildings and afterwards our buildings shape us. So you can have people in two buildings side by side, and if they don't go to coffee together, the chance of doing research together is almost negligible. We have to encourage people to come together in research spaces. These research spaces are where different people from different disciplines can come together and collide with each other's, their science can collide with each other, their ideas can collide with each other. One thing that I've been involved in is what I call sandpits, where you get these different disciplines to come together and almost play together, identify problems and then work together and see if they can come to a solution from their different research, academic, scholarly background. And they've been very successful and they work very well. I've also encouraged interdisciplinary studentships where I funded studentships for PhDs across faculties. And they could only be accepted for funding if there was more than one faculty involved in the supervision or the mentorship of that student. And those have worked well. But we have to do more incentives, encourage people to come together to address those sustainability goals and other big challenges that face us. Steve Jobs famously said that he wanted a new building for Apple headquarters in California, in Silicon Valley. And there's a apocryphal story told about him where he met with the architects and they said, oh, we have a great idea, Mr. Jobs, we're going to have a quadrant of buildings, 4 buildings, and in one building we're going to have the administrator, and the next building we're going to have the software engineers, and the next building we're going to have the managers, and the next building we're going to have the technologists. And he said, no, I'm not having it. And in his own inimitable way, he was able to say, I want these people in the same building. I want them to, the coffee points, the whiteboards, the restrooms, the lifts to be strategically placed throughout that building so that people are going to bump into each other, not just metaphorically, but physically on a day-to-day basis, and they can bring their problems to each other and their solutions to each other. And hence you see in the slide the famous donut-shaped building that they came up with to feed Steve Jobs' vision of interdisciplinary research. And you have to admit that Apple has been very successful in its research enterprises. In the bottom half, you'll see the Francis Crick building, which is based in the centre of London. Francis Crick, one of the discoverers of DNA. This building is also shaped in such a way that a number of different disciplines will have every opportunity to work with each other, to sit shoulder to shoulder to identify similar problems, but come at it with different solutions. And I believe that's the future for nursing. And nurses, of course, can lead on some of those interdisciplinary areas. Okay, the second point I want to talk about is research impact. You see in this diagram by Phipps et al. Back in 2016, a 5-stage process from research to dissemination to uptake to implementation. And implementation is divided into 2 areas, implementation and impact. Now, I believe that so far nurses have been really good at doing research. They get funding for research, they undertake the research, they publish or present at international conferences, so they're really good at dissemination. And in many cases, that's where it stops for researchers, and not just nursing. It's possible that they believe that somebody else will come along on a big white charger and take their research findings from a library shelf and implement them, and that's somebody else's business. That's no longer the case. The researchers have to be involved to ensure that their research has uptake and impact. And many universities, including University of Sydney, are involved in research assessment exercises where impact and engagement is rewarded by funding from governments. And more governments are doing this. So it's no longer the case where you can be happy to say, well, I'm going to get some funding for my research, I'm going to do a study, and I'm going to publish the papers, and I'm going to travel around the world presenting at conferences. That's not good enough. That has to stop. You must, from almost day one, say, how am I going to ensure that this research that I'm doing has impact? Because if it doesn't have any impact, why do it in the first place? It's a waste of public funding and probably a waste of your time. And ethically, it's a waste of the time that your respondents or subjects spend giving you information. Research impact can be affected by a time lag. So you do the research and it could be a while before you see the benefits. And when I think about research impact, I do think of benefits. So you can see here that the identification of the ineffectiveness of hydrochloric solution as a desleuphant agent for pressure areas, it took 5 to 10 years for that to be discovered. And in the meantime, a lot of patients suffered having USOL, as you used to call it, applied to their wounds and to their pressure sores. The identification and effectiveness of the use of thrombolytic therapy as a treatment for acute myocardial infarction took 20 to 30 years for the research to find its way into general practice. And we know the story that it took 264 years for the effectiveness of citric juice and citrus juice to be implemented and used in the prevention of scurvy. So you have to ask yourself, what about the time lag? When your research is done, how long is it going to take for that research to show benefits? So if I take a look at how I used to be involved in research, and I've been doing research for a long time. I am very old. That's why you get invited to do these distinguished lectures, because you've been around a long time. Well, in the past, I got some money to do research, and I did the research, and I produced the results, and I presented the results, and I wrote them up in journals. And then I got some more research funding, and the process started again. I never once thought about, should I make sure that this research has impact? It never crossed my mind. Increasingly over a period of time, I began to say, okay, I must do something about this, because no point in these research reports sitting on library shelves. So the research is undertaken and disseminated as usual. And then I go and I identify some people in practice, or some people, politicians or civil servants who are involved in policy making. And I sit down with them and say, I've just done this research, and I think the findings would apply to your work. One example of that is I did some research in young male suicide. And I went along after the research was published, and I went along to the chief medical officer and said, I've got some research here that I think will influence your next suicide strategy or prevention of suicide strategy. I had a conversation with him and I shared some findings with him, and yes, the research found its way into that suicide strategy. So that's really being more active. However, that's not enough. We need to be proactive, and we start with the end in mind. So in other words, at the start now, when I get some funding, I say, who do I need on my research team? And sometimes this happens even before I get the funding. When I'm writing the proposal, I have managers around the table. I have policymakers around the table so that they become part of the team, from design through to dissemination, and through to the development of the research into some sort of impact. So before I leave impact, I have to say that there must be no disjoint between impact and its underpinning research. So your research must have impact, and the day is long gone where you can afford to just do your research and not think about what benefits this research has for patients, for their families, for communities, and for nursing. Methodological and theoretical sophistication is my next topic in this journey. Ideas are fine, but science has to be the highest quality. I did a lot of research over the years on nursing theories. There are 50 nursing theories, far too many, and they go from grand theories to mid-range theories to practice theories. Grand theories are these theories where are very obtuse, very difficult to implement in practice. Practice theories are more about how do you change practice, how can you introduce an intervention that will make a difference. And therefore, we need to do more in terms of producing practice theories and less on grand theories. In fact, I think there should be a moratorium on any more theory development until we begin to test the theories we already have. A lot of people have made their name from having a theory named after them. But what good is that if it doesn't change quality and safety of care for patients? The randomized controlled trial is held up by somebody as the gold standard, that if you're going to do research, you must do research and go using RCT. Well, I don't necessarily agree. It depends on the question. If the question is, does this particular intervention make a difference with this patient group? Yes, maybe a randomized controlled trial where you have an experimental group and a control group, and perhaps that is the way forward, and that could be the gold standard. But if I wanted to find out what it's like to have a diagnosis of diabetes, what does that really feel like? Then I would talk to people and get their lived experience. And a phenomenological approach, a qualitative approach, may be more appropriate. So in that case, an RCT is not the gold standard. Some other more qualitative approach is. And we've seen this in the rise of mixed methods. In the past, people were almost divided, and nurses were divided into quantitative researchers and qualitative researchers. I always found that strange. I always thought research was like a workman or workwoman coming with their bag of tools, and you look at what the problem is and you put your hand in the bag of tools and you take out whatever tool is necessary. So if it's to put a screw in a wall, you take out a screwdriver. If it's to put a nail in a piece of wood, you maybe take out a hammer. If it's to test cause and effect, you use a more quantitative approach. If it's to find out how people feel, what their feelings, what their beliefs are, what their experience is, then I would use a grounded theory approach or a more qualitative approach such as phenomenology or ethnography. So it differs. Increasingly, people are undertaking research, and this will become more important in the future, using admin data analysis. So you get data that's already collected by different governments on education, on justice, on health, and they're all fed into your computer, and you sit at your desk and you just analyze and compare these different databases, and you come up with really interesting solutions to current difficulties. They call Archie Cochrane. You probably have heard of Archie Cochrane. Archie Cochrane he discovered, if you like, he was the father of randomized controlled trials. But even Cochrane, who was a prisoner during the Second World War, prisoner of war camp in the Far East, even Cochrane decided that there were different ways, different knowledge that came to use. And I'll let you read this, and I will get back to you in a second. So Cochrane, who was an out-and-out quantitative researcher, who was seen by many as the father of randomized controlled trials, realized that for some problems and for some ways of handling people's issues, feelings, you had to adopt other ways, perhaps a more qualitative way. So that's why I think mixed methods are going to be more important in the future. Another issue I want to talk about that's going to be more and more important as we go forward is the involvement of patients and carers in the research approach. This is called co-production. Some people call it co-design. And you'll see a quote there at the top of the page, which I'm not going to read out to you, by Mahatma Gandhi, about the importance of patients in healthcare. And that they're the most important person, not the health professional, which some health professionals have great difficulty dealing with. You know, they see themselves very much as the expert, years and years of education behind them, and how they're going to tell the patient what to do. The patient's a receptive individual who's going to listen to the advice they're given by people in control, professionals. George Bernard Shaw said that professionals were a conspiracy against the laity. And in years past, I've seen this happen. I've witnessed professionals, both nurses and doctors, come into wards and expect patients to almost to stand to attention because the boss had arrived. Those days hopefully are gone, and in the future they will never appear again. Patients should become partners in care and research. They should be involved from the beginning as equal partners in addressing what the problem is, in working through the problem and coming up with a solution and helping implement the solution. In some parts of the world, the UK and Australia in particular, and in the US increasingly, you will not get funded from some big substantial funding bodies for your research unless you have involved patients from day one who are equal members of the team. I would encourage this. I've also been involved in another role where patients have been through a terrible experience in hospital. Maybe a family member has died, and those patients have been involved working with the staff afterwards to find out what happened and to make sure it'll never happen to any other family again. And they're truly involved in co-production of new ways of working, new ways of designing services to ensure that problems are not repeated. A couple of examples. If you take this inverted triangle, you have to ask yourself when you're doing your research, tell me, where am I here? Am I involving patients from day one at the very bottom, no involvement? Or are they almost in full control where they initiate the idea and lead the project? Where are you along that continuum? I hope that you're at least near the top. If not, you should be. And increasingly that will be the case. I'll give you some examples, and these are real life examples that have come my way. This is where people claim co-production and design, but is it really? So take the first one. Patients will be involved during my research and they will be my subjects. I will be asking my patients to take part in my study. Patients will be asked to carry this sampling storage equipment and present them to staff at delivery. Patients will provide feedback on the proposed interview guide. Participants will be offered a copy of the results of the study. That's very kind of us, isn't it? I will be giving talks about the research. Of course you will. I see patients all the time and I know what their views are on this. So you will still get researchers today who think that co-production, co-design is reflected in those statements. It is not. Let's look at some more positive ways of looking at co-production, co-design. The patient information sheets were written by a patient advisory group. Okay, that's going somewhere towards it. Patients help develop the research topic and what research questions should be asked. That's another way. Patients are co-applicants and will continue to be involved in the study. Or finally, the study was conceived, designed and led by a patient group who led the application for funding and will be involved in all aspects, including undertaking the research and dissemination. Yes, that's where we need to go. Ask yourself, how far along that continuum are you? Ask yourself the research that you read as part of your studies. How many of those research projects can reflect co-production and co-design to that regard? We'll talk a little bit about knowledge transfer. Traditionally, universities have been seen as reservoirs of knowledge, but in times of stress during COVID and the financial crisis, society demands that universities become bridges between the world of knowledge and the world of business. This is not new. The Agora, the Business Academy, was situated next to the Academy on the slopes of the Acropolis in ancient Athens. And this ensured that business people and academics, scholars had every opportunity to speak, to meet, to discuss problems, and to come up with solutions. We need to encourage the seamless transfer of ideas from the research lab to the lecture hall to the marketplace, because let's face it, research drives innovation, innovation drives the creation of wealth and the creation of a society that is using the very best technology to advance its purposes. If I could go back to that one for a moment, let me see if I can go back, previous. Knowledge transfer, a lot of nurses are coming up with great ideas for apps that will encourage people to get more involved in health promotion and disease prevention. Nurses have come up with new ways of fighting incontinence, new ways of fighting pressure sores, and those can be brought to the market, and nurses can do very well financially from ensuring that those ideas that they thought about in the research lab and worked on find its way to the marketplace. Publish or perish. Research is not complete unless it's communicated. I know of people who complete their PhDs and never published one word of it. I know 2 or 3 people like that. I can't understand that. You have to, if your research is funded by public funds, by taxpayers' money, you have an ethical obligation to ensure that that work is published and got out there into society. So what is your publishing policy within the University of Sydney? Hopefully it's quality, not quantity. I've had people come to my office when I was dean and said to me, I'm very important and I've got 30 or 40 papers. Yeah, they had 30 or 40 papers, but the quality of those papers weren't very good. I would rather tell it came to me, I would say I've got 2 papers that are of the highest quality and they've been cited by hundreds of people. I'm being contacted to do more research in this field and contacted to speak at conferences all over the world. So quantity should not be considered when it comes to research quality. People should focus on journals that are in Scopus or Thomson Reuters Web of Science, and not too many non-peer-reviewed journals, unless you want to get to a particular audience. I know that many nurse practitioners don't read Journal of Advanced Nursing, Journal of Nurse Scholarship, or International Journal of Nursing Studies, or the Lancet, or the BMJ. They might read Nursing Standard or Nursing Times, or whatever your particular professional journal is. So maybe, well, I think researchers should publish in both academic publications, but also publish when it comes to professional journals. Altmetrics, you know about, that's how your particular social media engagements find its way into influencing people to read your work and to get involved and find out more about the research that you're doing. Many universities have set up institutional repositories for gold and green open access, and I'll let you look up yourself what gold and green open access is. Well, I suppose I would say to you that in the past, as new research was done, it was produced in a journal. That journal, if you wanted access to it, you had to pay a subscription fee, or you had to go along to a library that paid the subscription fee to access that journal. Now many journals are open access, so as soon as the research is done and published, you can get access to it across the world. This should shorten the time between the research and impact. And in fact, now some people are producing preprints, so you can actually get access to the research publication before it's been peer reviewed. But that's another story. And there's some metrics that you can look at there. How many times have your papers been cited? So you publish a paper in a journal. If it's not cited, you have to ask yourself, is my work not important enough? Nobody, absolutely nobody has cited it. So it's important to look at citations. How often is your journal being cited? And your citation can, over the years, can find its way into other types of matrices and indices such as H index, G index, E, F, and F. Well, I'll let you look those up at your leisure. DORA is a declaration about research assessment from, it's called the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. And this is to stop people from using impact factors in journals as a way of supporting their promotion in a university or promotion internationally. Impact factors are now seen by many who sign up to DORA, and most universities and funding bodies have signed up to DORA, seen as not important and shouldn't be used. Here is you all know when you send in a manuscript to a publisher that they send you back proofs. So Samuel Johnson, excuse me, Samuel Johnson famously said of a manuscript that was sent in for publication that your manuscript is good and original, but the part that is good is not original, and the part that is original is not good. Now, you don't want to hear that from a journal when you are seeking a peer-reviewed journal to look at your manuscript for publication. Fake news. You all, maybe when you look at this, President Trump will no longer be president of the USA. But at the moment he is, and he's very much, even today, talking about fake news when it comes to what Joe Biden is telling him and what people are telling him about COVID. But fake news, we've seen a lot of it in research also. So we know that research has been done that has been fake. And some of that has been taken up by practitioners, and some of that has been taken up by policymakers. And there's some examples, I'll only go through a few here. Cyril Burt, he was a psychologist, and he produced educational psychology articles that led to the creation in the UK of what we call the 11+. This is where people at 11 years of age have to do an exam, and the results of that exam will decide whether they go into towards a university or whether they go into a secondary school. We found out that Cyril Burt faked his research. He even faked a research assistant that never existed. Also, we know that Staple from the University of Amsterdam, he faked his research, and he faked an entire team. He never did the research that he published. And we know that the MMR vaccine controversy, a study published in The Lancet of all places, claimed that it caused autism, and this was revealed to be fraudulent. And we know that we go down that Other University of Utah, we know that chemists there carried out research into what they called cold fusion. And when people tried to replicate it, when people tried to repeat the research years later, they couldn't. So these and other examples have led to a growing distrust of scientific experts. And I'll bring that today to COVID. I don't know what it's like in Australia, but in the UK and the US, we know that 1 minute the scientists are telling the government, you need to go into lockdown. And the next minute they're saying, if you take Sweden as an example, herd immunity. So let's go out there and get them, especially young people, let them get the virus. They'll build up an immunity, and that immunity will then spread throughout the population, and you'll not have to go into lockdown. The public are looking, now more than ever before, they're looking for answers to what to do during COVID. And they're getting mixed messages from scientists, and they're confused. So science and distrust of science is a very real thing. And we have to do our best to make sure that the science that we produce and the science that we report on is the best available evidence that we have. Social media, this is another example of pseudo expertise. We know that people that go to their general practitioner or a family doctor now and say, I read on the internet last night that this is the treatment I should be having, and why am I not having it? And in many cases, they could be right. But we know that back in 2016, the Independent newspaper in the UK examined 20 most shared articles on Facebook with the word cancer in the title, and more than half of these articles made claims that have been widely discredited by the medical professionals and healthcare organizations. So rubbish in, rubbish out. You have to be very careful when it comes to social media. I'm doing some research at the moment on social media's influence on people who are actively suicidal. And you will see social media pages of telling people how to cut themselves, telling people how to self-harm, and more legislation is needed to do something about such sites. So pseudo expertise, I'm not saying it's all pseudo expertise, but just be careful in social media. And I think in the future, we will see more legislations coming in to deal with social media and fake news. And I know that Mark Zuckerberg has begun to put in policies within Facebook to ensure that this is detected earlier on and stopped from appearing on screen. But nurses will be using more social media in the future. It's just that they have to do it carefully. Technology. You're all far too young to remember what that phone looked like on the left-hand side. I didn't have one that old, but I had one next to it, and every time you pressed a button, the air came up and nearly took your nose away. So that tells you how old I am. We know that there's such a thing called Moore's Law, that processor speed or overall processing power for computers will double every 2 years. And we know that if car technology was as advanced as computer technology, we'd be driving a car that could go at 1,000 miles an hour at the moment and could probably take you to the moon and back. That's how advanced computer technology has been over the last 20 or 30 years. And that's going to get more advanced as we proceed into the future. And we have at the moment electronic records, which are faster and lead to a better diagnosis. We've patient alarm systems, we've lift equipment, we've robotic surgery, we've simulation and nurse education, and you could add to the list again and again and again. This is an important role for researchers in the future of harnessing technology and in testing the benefits of technology in smart homes for people so that they can live independently even when disabled or who had a stroke. But data security is problematic and will continue to be problematic in the future. You will always get people who are trying to access computer programs and cause problems with them. So that's something else that nurses and researchers are going to have to deal with as we progress into the future. Artificial intelligence in healthcare is becoming more important. There's a computer algorithm which has outperformed human experts in spotting signs of breast cancer from mammograms. And much, much better than humans at detecting signs of breast cancer. And they suffer miss 2.7 fewer cases of cancer than the radiologists. So we are going to see more of this artificial intelligence and smart app technology on our phones for health promotion and disease prevention. It has been said that in the future, the factory will have only 2 employees, a man and a dog. The man will be there to feed the dog, and the dog will be there to keep the man from touching the equipment. There's some truth in that in the future, hospitals will not look as hospitals do today. And going back to COVID for a second, we know that more and more diagnostic information is available now online, and more treatments are being administered online, and more follow-up is being undertaken virtually. So there is some truth in this particular story by Warren Bennis. Okay, you are here in the Milky Way, and it has been said that if the billions of years of life on Earth were scaled to a 24-hour day, our settled civilizations began about a fifth of a second ago. So at the moment we're talking about global health, and you've seen in an earlier slide those sustainability, UN sustainability health problems, of which there were 18. But in the future we're going to be looking at planetary health. We have Elon Musk, who are now able, in his spacecraft, is able to take people on trips into space. You'll see more of this going into the future, and this means that there are going to be issues around healthcare, issues around nursing, and physiological disturbances caused by being in different scenarios outside the normal atmosphere. So that's going to be really exciting. I'm not going to tell you what it's going to look like because I don't know, but you or your children or your children's children, if they go into healthcare, will be definitely involved in planetary health in the future. Now you recognize Greta Thunberg, I'm sure, and you'll see here on this slide that back to planetary health, I was saying, we know that CO2 is causing problems. We know that global deforestation is causing problems, especially in the Amazon basin. And we also know that the use of fertilizers are causing problems with pollution in rivers and pollution in the atmosphere. And we know that energy use is an issue worldwide. And going forward, less fossil fuel energy, more wind and other sustainable types of energies. This is becoming more important, and we're seeing more and more articles about it in the nursing literature and in the medical literature. And picture yourself, what's your role in that? I believe that nurses have a really important role in these issues, and they can influence these issues by their teaching, because you're teaching the next generation of health professionals. Coming near the end, you'd be delighted to know. Leadership, everything I've said so far about the future, everything I've said is to do with leadership. And I have worked with many, many types of leaders over the years. I've worked with autocratic leaders who told you what to do. And when they said jump, you said how high. And I've dealt with democratic leaders who said, well, before I make a decision, let's sit down and join hands. And I've met with other types of leaders who led from the back or led from the front. You see here in this slide that the sort of traits we expect to see in our leaders. It has been said that there are 5 types of leaders. Now I'm going to tell you what these 5 types are. And you consider which type you are, or those people who you see as your leaders, what type of leader are they? So the first type is those who make things happen. Are you one of those? Those who think they make things happen. Are you one of those? Those who watch things happen. Are you one of those? Those who wondered what had happened. Are you one of those? And those who didn't know anything had happened at all. Are you one of those? Hopefully you're in the first category. You make things happen. because we'll not be able to tackle the health and social care problems of the future without being able to make things happen. Famously said by Alan Toffler that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but it will be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that's what healthcare, that's what patients, their families and communities will expect from you. So my final thought to you is never give up. When it comes to research, let quality be your watchword. When it comes to patient care, let quality and safety guide you in how you look after patients, look after their families, make a difference to health promotion, disease prevention, not just in your local hospital or community, but also in your country and globally and in the future when it comes to the planet. Thank you. Here are my contact details. And as I said, you can click on that web link if you want to find out more about me. It's been a great pleasure. Again, I would like to thank John Daly for asking me to do this, and I hope it was enjoyable. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with me if you want more details on any one of those issues that I raised. I could only speak about some of them briefly, but I'm very happy to share with you more information if you're interested. So, goodbye.